According to academia, we are in a period called civil strife in the United States.
The American political landscape right now is very dry tinder.
History has shown you go to greater and greater extremism, and then you have the battle.
And then the open insurgency stage, you start to see a sustained series of attacks.
70 or more deaths per year for political purposes. So far this year, the number is 30, and last year was higher than that.
There have been 30 deaths in 2025.
Yes.
The suspect in the New Orleans vehicle attack has been identified by the FBI.
Autopsy on the guy who tried to kill President Trump.
A man is charged in connection with an arson at the Pennsylvania governor's residence while Governor Shapiro and his family slept inside.
We are looking at, it is administrative, but it's also kinetic, and it's worse than it's ever been. At the highest level of culture in the liberal faction, they are celebrating terrorism.
Wow, you guys like petty acts of domestic terrorism, huh? Cool. Wow. Okay.
They are celebrating the murder committed by Luigi Mangione.
Free Luigi!
There are hot points of conflict across the country, but it is sporadic right now.
It seems like tat for tat. That's kind of my.
You mean
so?
You mean the right started fighting back?
The right is fighting back. Then what will the response be?
Already, what we've seen is.
Before we hear from Tim Pool, I ask if you want to support this show, all you have to do is press subscribe. And if you do that, I can have more phenomenal guests like Tim Pool exploring the issues you want to hear about and the mainstream media won't touch. And head over to winstonmarshall.co.uk if you want exclusive videos, content, and interviews. But without further ado, Tim Pool. Tim, thank you so much for having me in your incredible pad at your poker table here down in deep West Virginia. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you.
Oh, thanks for having me on. I think for people who are watching, they may notice that we're a little low on the table. This is normal. It's a poker table. It's a high rail.
Oh, okay.
So we're sitting at the poker table.
If we could have an actual dealer and play whilst we talk, that would be but that's for the next time when I'm back.
Yeah.
So a couple of things I want to talk about. I want to get into your journey through populism because that's what we touched on my show a little bit about. But one of the things I wanted to understand, because I've just been in DC and the spirit, the energy there is still somewhat euphoric, somewhat revolutionary. Certainly, obviously, the MAGA half. There's a sense of this being a sort of a glorious American revolution. We had in Britain had a glorious revolution, no bloodshed. It seems, I'm not sure you could say there's no bloodshed in this one, but it feels like there's a winning spirit, particularly from conservatives in DC. Now, you've made an argument for a good while that America is heading towards civil war if it is not already in a cold civil war.
Indeed.
So I want to know, I either want to have you try and persuade me that that's the case, or is it that since the inauguration, since Trump's winning for a second time, that is no longer the case and that the civil war has been quelled?
Maybe. It's something that I've actually brought up quite a bit with, which is why I advocated so heavily for a popular vote victory of Donald Trump, not just to win the Electoral College, but to win the popular vote. What that does is the middle of the road, we call them default liberal types. Their fear is being on the wrong side of history. And that's why you'll often hear at protests among the left, they'll chant shame. They want regular people to be scared, or they'll actually say, you're on the wrong side of history. They want these people to fear the majority. With Trump winning the popular vote, the narrative has been flipped. And you instantly started seeing people, a good example is Charlemagne the God, where, before the election, he's very much Trump is bad. Then after the election, he goes, maybe they were lying to us about this. He realized, hey, wait a minute. Look at what's going on with the majority of this country. So it is entirely possible. And that's why, again, I advocated so heavily Trump must win a popular vote so that we can say we are the right side of history and there's no need for violence, bloodshed, or any escalation. Trump's going to go in through the electoral process with administrative power, and he's going to clean up government, and he's going to quell those that are fomenting the worst of the divide and the violence. That may be the case. I don't know to what probability it is or isn't. But as to the argument about us being on track for a civil war, how about this? To convince you, I'll appeal to authority. You have a former CIA analyst, I believe her name is Barbara F. Walters. She's argued in her work for the CIA, she tracked countries that were tracking towards civil war. There is a period of civil unrest. It becomes civil strife and then becomes civil war. Those are the academic terms to describe the escalation of tumult. In her expert analysis as a CIA analyst, the United States is trending towards civil war. She wrote a book about it. Maybe she's just trying to make some money. You also had a Princeton professor. This is probably 7 years ago. This interview was published. I'm not sure the original publication, but the Hill reported this. He said, "We are in a cold civil war." You also have.
When did the first book get published? The CIA published this.
I'm not entirely sure who published her, but her name is Barbara F. Walters.
And what year was that published?
I believe that may have been 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay.
You also have Stephen Marsh, who is a journalist. He is more pro-Democrat, more left-leaning, and he's argued much of the exact same things that I have, or I should say he's observed very similarly. But he's just a journalist. Let's try Ray Dalio, the billionaire, who recently said within the last month, we are in some kind of civil war. Or how about Eric Weinstein, who said this is administrative civil war. Certainly administrative civil war is much different from kinetic civil war, which implies physical violence. So what I would say right now is, not my opinion. According to academia, we are in a period called civil strife in the United States. There are certain criteria that academics require for a period to be referred to in this time. One of them is 70 or more deaths per year for political purposes, political reasoning. So far this year, I think the number is 30, and last year was higher than that.
There have been 30 deaths in 2025 for political reasons in the USA.
Yes.
I don't think I'd heard of one of them.
Well, there was the woman who murdered her father over election issues in the Pacific Northwest. You don't remember that one?
Okay, no.
Off the top of my head, that's the obvious one. I'm sorry. That was actually last year. That was 2024. Since the election, I believe we have about 30 or so deaths that were motivated by politics. So
what is this? Intra-family? What?
Well, I mean, the one example off the top of my head, we've covered quite a bit of these, and it's the reason why we have is because a man named Rudyard Lynch, who runs a YouTube channel called What If Alt History, came on this show on Timcast IRL and argued by April, from the election to April, 1,000 people will have died for political purposes. And I said, there's no way that's going to happen. And it hasn't. We're recording this right before April's to begin. Maybe he wants to make the argument, no, I meant by the end of April. Sure, give himself an extra month. We have seen an escalation of violence. So he said that he had a bet for $1,000 that would be the case. I said, absolutely not.
We've definitely seen an escalation of violence. No one would
but there have been
that. It depends what you mean by violence. But if you look at the Tesla destruction of the Tesla cars, burning of Tesla dealerships, there's definitely, and there's even the reemergence of Antifa, and specifically Trantifa. So we've talked to Andy Ngo about this recently.
Oh, here's another example. The Trantifa who assassinated that CBP agent in Vermont.
Yes. Was part of the Zizian cult.
Yep.
Yes. Was that this year?
It was, yeah.
Right, okay. So I guess so if you get 70 in one nation, that is deemed to be 70 deaths, political deaths, that's deemed what?
Civil strife.
But 70 in a country of 350 million is different to 70 in a country of,
Agreed. I completely agree.
Right.
And this is what the academics, how they determine civil strife periods. They would say that the civil rights movement was a period of civil strife. It did not result in a civil war. So
quite.
My hope is that
2020, by the way, there were a lot of deaths. There was, that must have been a peak period for it. At least Andy documented at least 25 between George Floyd's death and the end of October in 2020. I don't know if we get to 70.
There were, I believe, political deaths in the George Floyd riots might have been 24. Well, political deaths. Murders. I believe the total death count from the George Floyd riots was like 36, but we try to separate out someone, accidentally getting hit by a car while the riots were going on versus, David Dorn, for instance, was shot in the chest by a rioter who was stealing TVs from a pawn shop.
Okay, so I mean, I can definitely understand the argument of a civil war if you look at populism and counter-populism. Anyone paying attention to the censorship, the expose of censorship and the censorship industrial complex, not just with the Twitter files, but the Missouri Biden legal case before that, through discovery, we saw a lot of what was going on. There's undoubtedly there's some sort of war, be it a political war, and be it maybe it's not a kinetic war, right?
Right.
So
well,
When you're talking about, well, what you do think it is a kinetic.
Well, I mean, just in the past couple of weeks, we've had mass public shootings. We've had firebombings. A woman just over the weekend, a green car pulls in front of her Tesla, boxing her between the curb and the car. The man jumps out of the car, runs up to her window, and starts punching her in the face repeatedly. So not a killing, but a political attack. A woman was targeted with political violence because of the car she drove. Some argue we are seeing kinetic conflict happening across this country already, particularly with Tesla. But the issue, of course, is the scale to which someone requires, in their mind, kinetic force to be applied before they would consider a war to be happening. But I reject that outright. That is grade school logic. Anybody who's looked into the academic view of war and what war is. Eric Weinstein said that we are in an administrative civil war. And I think that is completely fair to say.
Yeah.
They arrested Trump's lawyers.
Have you ever wondered what happened to the legend Chuck Norris? I recently saw a video he made and I was shocked. He's in his 80s and still, as they say in the colonies, kicking butt and working out and staying active. What's even more shocking is he's stronger, can work out longer, and even has plenty of energy left over for his grandkids. He did this by just making one change. He says he still feels like he's in his 50s. His wife even started doing this one thing too, and she's never felt better. She says she feels 10 years younger. Her body looks leaner and she has energy all day. Chuck made a specific video that explains everything. Make sure you watch it by going to chuckdefense.com/win or by clicking in the link below this video. It'll change the way you think about your health. Once again, that's chuckdefense.com/win and click on the link in the description below to watch the video now. You won't believe how simple it is. Just a reminder, the legendary Chuck Norris is a whopping 84 years old. He discovered he could create dramatic changes to his health simply focusing on 3 things that sabotage our body as we age. Watch this method by clicking the link in the description box below. chuckdefense.com/win. But back to the interview.
They arrested Trump's lawyers last year, or was it the year before? I don't know. Jenna Ellis, for instance, was criminally charged with racketeering, 2 counts, for simply being Trump's lawyer. Donald Trump said, I want to challenge the election. I'm hiring a lawyer. She said, okay, what do you need me to do? Draft me a letter making the argument. She said, okay, conspiracy charges for a lawyer. That's unconstitutional.
Mm-hmm.
The left says we don't care. It's not. We're allowed to do it because the lawyer's a criminal. Well, I will say this. Anytime a lawyer is being arrested by the government, except if it's Saul Goodman, the dude's literally a criminal, we're talking about an unconstitutional action in this country. But I think anyone would agree. If an individual with the proper legal permitting for whatever the country requires is providing legal advice at an administrative level, not overt obvious crimes, and the government arrests them and charges them with felonies, so they bow out, drop off, and plead guilty, that people would say you are entering tyranny or dictatorship. Mm-hmm. So if that's the case, and they didn't just go after Jenna Ellis, they went after several of Trump's lawyers across the board. And this goes back to even 2016 when it started with Manafort, when it was reported by Politico that Ukraine had leaked documents to the Democrats, dirt on Trump's, one of his associates, Paul Manafort, resulting in criminal charges, or the attempt to imprison Michael Flynn. Democrats have been using governmental and administrative power to shut down their political opponents going back to 2015, and the right has done nothing in response. Now, what would you call it? Say, if a man won an election, but they arrest him or boot him off. What would you say if a guy was running for office and then judges in that country said, nope, we're removing him, he can't run? We wouldn't call it democracy, would we?
Quite.
Right. So like Romania right now, or Marine Le Pen right now, or Bolsonaro in Brazil. As for the United States, to get away from what we're seeing over there, they falsely accuse Trump of rape. They claim, but a jury in New York found him liable. They found him liable of a 30-year-old claim with no evidence, where the witness could not corroborate her story. She couldn't explain why the Bergdorf Goodman was empty on a busy day, or why Trump would go there instead of the hotel he owned across the street, why she was wearing a dress that had not been released that time, was only released a few years later, nor how she unlocked locked doors. Didn't matter. In New York, 90+% Democrat, they said Trump is guilty. It wasn't a criminal offense. But then you did have when they accused Trump of civil fraud, despite the fact that his lender said he never defrauded us. He did everything by the book. This is normal business practice, and we work with him again. What we've been seeing is attempts by the administrative state on the left, the Democrat-aligned and neoconservative, to be fair, establishment forces, using unconstitutional methods to destroy their political opponents. It's a lot harder to do in this country than what we saw in Romania, where Georgescu, I believe, I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong, was just deemed unable to run for office despite having committed no crimes. They just said he can't do it.
So it's civil lawfare is what we're sort of talking about
right now. But take a look at any civil war in any country. And what do people think it is? That one day a guy walks outside, screams, and they start fighting each other? Civil strife periods always have periods of administrative conflict between warring factions. For example, in the American Civil War, you had the period of civil strife that predated the U.S. Civil War was called Bleeding Kansas. You had factions across the board filing legal paperwork and going after each other in the attempt to make slavery legal or illegal in various territories or states. Bleeding Kansas was an extremely bloody period of 7 years where people were shooting each other and beating each other. Famously, John Brown brought his sons, went to Kansas, and one of the famous stories is that he walked up to a slave owner in his field without word and blew his face off. Just bang, right in the head. He then, of course, is famous for going to Harper's Ferry and trying to stage a slave revolt, which failed. But these periods of violence are the precursor to civil war. They don't guarantee a civil war happens. But what did we get in the American Civil War? Abraham Lincoln, after he won his election, 7 states said, we will secede from the Union before he even took office. So there was a period of several months where these southern states had deemed themselves separate from the United States. And it was ultimately 11 states, but 7 at the time. Abraham Lincoln had federal troops occupying a base in Fort Sumter, South Carolina. The Confederates, the South Carolinians, said, you must evacuate this base. They said, no, fighting broke out. Only person who died, it was an accident. Nobody thought a civil war would happen. Even after the North and the South were shooting at each other, trying to take over this base or hold it, the American people said civil war will not happen. Now, if you read the history books, they say civil war, that's when it started. That is the shot heard around the world for the U.S. Civil War, Fort Sumter. The first battle after that was the Battle of Manassas, or the first Battle of Bull Run. The American people, still so dead set on believing a civil war could not happen, held picnics on the battlefield. And when the Confederate Union forces started blowing each other's heads off, it was panic and disarray and people were fleeing in random directions. They did not believe it was going to happen. Now, the funny thing is, the Confederates won. And if they marched a couple miles into D.C., the Confederates would have won the U.S. Civil War. But the Confederates were saying, we don't want to go to war. We want to be separate from you. Lincoln rallies the troops, causing fear in the states where 4 other states then announced they will be seceding from the Union. What did Abraham Lincoln do? He created a suspension of habeas corpus zone from Pennsylvania to D.C., where you could be arrested for any reason without charge, without trial, and held indefinitely. He had the Maryland state legislature that was sympathetic to the Confederates because Maryland was a slave state, arrested and threatened to arrest one of the sitting Supreme Court justices. Is that tyrannical and a dictatorship when the president begins to do these things?
Well, you would have supported it, right?
This is a tough question. I don't know. I mean, right now we can
support the concept of the union, right?
The concept of a union, but I mean, right now.
Let's just finish on Abraham Lincoln, like that. Okay. Yes, that is tyrannical in a sense, but that's
overtly.
Yeah. So overtly, not in a sense, overtly.
Yeah.
But presumably, if you are in favor of the union and against what the Confederate States were doing, you'd be in favor of that. I guess this is
indeed
this is the problem then we get to if we're trying to apply that to now.
And this is why civil wars happen, because what we're looking at. I had a debate recently between a liberal and a conservative lawyer, and they were arguing whether what Trump was doing was constitutional or not. And I said, it seems to me it doesn't matter if it is or isn't, because what we have witnessed now, Joe Biden opening the border, allowing people to come in by the millions in defiance of our Constitution and our laws. When Donald Trump wanted to challenge an election, and by all means, I think he was wrong. I think Trump lost 2020 to Biden because Biden had mail-in votes. And the system was set up legally in advance.
You don't think Trump was right to challenge that election?
Well, I think Trump can challenge it. I think anyone...
He tried it, but he should have accepted the result.
I believe he was factually incorrect, but I believe he was within his rights to challenge an election, as is anyone.
Mm-hmm.
The Democrats argue that the challenging of an election in any way is criminal, and they would criminally charge his lawyers. So I had a liberal lawyer on my show, The Culture War, say Jenna Ellis is a criminal because she provided criminal advice to Donald Trump. What was the crime? Donald Trump wanted to challenge an election. He asked a lawyer, what are the legal means by which we can challenge the election? She said, here's what you do. He says, let's do it. She said, okay. Now she's a criminal.
Sorry, just to be clear, is it that they deemed it illegal to challenge it legally? Because they themselves in 2016 and throughout the first Trump term were constantly saying it's an illegitimate president, right? So
Trump did nothing illegal.
Trump did nothing illegal, but did they?
In 2020.
Do the Democrats who believe he did, do they think that in 2016 that they were?
No, of course not. Democrats
So is that a double standard hypocrisy?
Absolutely.
Or is that because they were just saying it, they weren't actually doing necessarily legal, they weren't challenging it
How
legally?
about right now? We'll give you an example. There was, during the Biden administration, they painted rainbows in the streets in various locations. One of them was in Florida. A young man in his truck drove over the rainbow and hit the brakes and the gas at the same time, skidding and putting a trail of black tire burns on that painting. He got charged with a felony for skidding.
A felony?
He got a felony charge
it's
for
a
it.
hate crime because what? Because it's a...
I don't know. They gave him a felony. Were Democrats defending that young man, saying this is a little bit excessive? Of course not. Today, there's felony charges for a woman who used bubblegum to damage the mechanism of a Tesla vehicle, the mechanical door latch. For those that aren't familiar with Teslas, these are not just simple, like every car, which is, these are computerized and electronic handles. And she jammed a wad of gum to break it. Cost $2,600 in damage, was a felony, and they are flabbergasted. Apoplectic.
Mm-hmm.
How could you charge? Now, look, it's a simple example at the ground level. At the administrative level, they have challenged every single election Republicans have won going back decades. They have tried to impeach Trump every step of the way in his first term. They accuse him of being a spy working for the Soviet Union. I'm not kidding. Jonathan Chait went on MSNBC and said Trump was working for the Russians going back to the 80s, potentially.
That has come up in the British, even in the Daily Mail have reported something like that recently, again, that he's a Russian asset.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it's absurdities.
Yeah.
To accuse the popular president of being a traitor to his nation where the penalty is death is shockingly insane. So what we're looking at right now is, here's the world we have in this country. You've got the Democrats who are arresting the lawyers, their political rival, accusing him of sex crimes. They passed a special law in New York to allow decades-old sexual assault accusations to be re-brought to trial, specifically for one case, Donald Trump. They falsely accused him of falsifying business records to criminally charge him in the Stormy Daniels case. When they couldn't get him, so this is important. The charges brought against Donald Trump in the Stormy Daniels case is a misdemeanor. That would mean that it's beyond its statute of limitations. They couldn't bring the case. But if they could upgrade it to a felony, the statute of limitations is not yet over. So the judge told the jury, you decide if you think Trump committed a secondary crime. Doesn't matter what crime you think he did. If you think he did, he's guilty. So we never got due process for Donald Trump. They never determined whether or not Trump actually committed a secondary crime, just that something may have occurred, in which case this is now a felony. This is tyranny and dictatorship. You ask about Abraham Lincoln and what he did. Was it good? Was it right? At the time, I'm sure a lot of people were terrified, especially the people he arrested without charge or trial who were innocent, and he did. But now we look back on Abraham Lincoln, and most Americans, when polled...
Just to be clear on my point on Abraham Lincoln, it was illegal to secede, right? So
No.
It wasn't illegal?
It was not illegal.
When did it become illegal to...
Afterwards.
Okay.
The issue of secession was legally dubious. It wasn't necessarily that you could or could not. So there are, and also I'll say this, it depends on who you're going to ask. Different academics will give you different answers, and I'm certainly not an
So
expert.
some academics will say it was illegal to secede.
Yes.
Because that's how I was taught it in school, but I need to brush up on my American Civil War history. The contention was that it was actually, oddly, not so much that it was about slavery, that it was about secession.
You can determine that it was illegal in any way you want, but Ulysses S. Grant said it himself after the war. It is the right of every person to challenge those who rule over them. But if you lose, you will be ruled by your betters. He wrote this amazing letter where he outlined that, yes, the Confederates had every right to say, we will not abide. Because the argument was 80 years prior, we said the same thing to the King of England. We said, we will not abide, and we created a nation. So how could we look at ourselves and say self-determination is a right, and then when the South said we demand it, we take it from them? The argument from Ulysses S. Grant was, had the Crown won, we would be ruled over by our betters, but they didn't. In this instance, the Union won. The issue with Abraham Lincoln is, at the time, before all of this is getting crazy. And the battlefields were not in the streets. They were Gettysburg. It was West Virginia. It was Antietam. For the people who were living in their houses in Atlanta or in New York, they didn't see any of this. They saw no conflict, no war. And it was only over a few years. Would they have supported what the president was doing? During war, I don't know. So the issue now becomes, when you look back at what Abraham Lincoln did, how would you have known he was going to win and preserve the Union? How did you know what was right, what was wrong when it hadn't happened yet? It's easy to look back now and say it was right for him to do because he preserved the Union. Perhaps. I think the Confederacy was very wrong. And they literally wanted to put slavery as a right in their Constitution, which is bad. And so I'm glad they lost. Now we look at Donald Trump and everything the Democrats had done, and we ask ourselves, what if Donald Trump made moves like Abraham Lincoln did? What if he said, I am going to arrest the legislature of Oregon because the legislature there is supporting the far left terror and violence that we've seen sweep this nation? Right now, people would say, it's not nearly that bad. You can't do that. The question then becomes, going back to the first Civil War, going back to the American Civil War, what had happened where Abraham Lincoln felt justified in arresting members of the Maryland state legislature? They simply were sympathetic to the Confederacy. So if Donald Trump were to arrest politicians for their sympathies, if we applied that to Abraham Lincoln, he's the good guy, I guess.
Sure. Okay. Actually, I want to bring that to Trump, or what we might say is a response to what has been going on, how you paint it, right? So there's a couple of things. Is the response to be super principled and say, look, we need to de-escalate. We need to calm these things down because it's getting heated. Let's go back to basic principles. You're behaving badly here. We need to chill out. Or, and this is what I'm nervous about, is that it's a fire with fire. Now, an example of this would be Trump saying now he wants to run for a third term, right? Now, I kind of laughed when I first heard it, but it's not infeasible that he's being serious. He certainly says he's not joking, although to be seen. Now, I fully support deporting illegal immigrants, particularly violent criminal illegal immigrants, but we've seen that at least one of the people sent off to El Salvador was a legitimate asylum seeker, a gay makeup artist.
An illegal immigrant, you mean?
No, just applying for asylum.
Illegally. He entered the country illegally. He broke the law.
Did he?
Yes.
Okay. His lawyer says something different. His lawyer says that he was going through the legitimate asylum.
Sure.
seeker.
So Joe Biden changed the process, allowing people to illegally cross the border in violation of U.S. law, but said, we'll just take the asylum request anyway. Whereas what's supposed to happen is, in your home country, you go to the American consulate, you apply, or to the first country neighboring yours to apply, or if it's the U.S. border, you go to a port of entry and apply. Joe Biden was allowing people to illegally enter the country and then granting them asylum status, but then dropping those cases and letting them stay here as secondary citizens without proper hearings.
Okay.
Now, in this instance, the reporting I saw was that the man had entered the country illegally and then claimed asylum after the fact. And the argument we're dealing with is, if the law says to come here legally for asylum, you must go through this route, and the previous administration breaks those rules, refuses to enforce it, and allows 10 million, and that's the low estimate, to cross the border illegally so long as soon as they're apprehended, they cry asylum, well, that seems like an exploitation of our laws. Should Donald Trump want to enforce the law as it is, we don't just let criminals say, I didn't rob the bank, I asked to borrow the money.
Okay, let's say I take your word for that.
No, maybe I'm wrong,
no, it could well be that I'm wrong and you've got this right. But let's just take him saying he wants to run for a third term, which is against the Constitution. That's going to piss off all of the never-Trumpers, the Trumpers who on the other side who hate him. That's not a de-escalation. That's not like returning to principles. It seems to me that that's fire with fire. Do you think that that's what we're seeing from the Trump's administration, from MAGA? That's like, they've behaved unbelievably badly. I agree that they've behaved badly. And our response isn't going to be return to principles. It's going to be, fuck you lot. We're going to end this. And like another example of this be Musk is up in Wisconsin as we speak, fighting the what he calls the activist judges. I don't disagree that they're activist judges, but we're pissed off. People like me and you are pissed off with George Soros and how he's been funding these people, these judges. From the other side, it looks like Elon Musk is now funding, or at least funding the kind of the counter resist, or the resistance to overturn these people. It seems like tat for tat. That's kind of my.
You mean
so?
You mean the right started fighting back?
The right is fighting back. And so if the right is fighting back, and it is indeed a civil war, as you described, and I think you make a pretty
well,
good
I don't know
case
that
for
it is a civil war.
You don't, but
It's civil strife.
Civil strife,
right? And that is not my opinion.
But,
that is what academics have stated.
The civil strife, it seems, is escalating. Indeed. Because and so then what will the response be, and what can we really expect the response to be from the other side in return for this?
Already what we've seen is almost every single move Trump has made under his authorities constitutionally has been opposed by low-level judges with no authority, and they've used it as a rallying cry to justify why they're allowed to stop a president. There are 677 district judges at the federal 677 district judges at the federal level. Donald Trump makes any move, and one of these judges says, "You're not allowed to do that." How do these judges have more power than the president of the United States? That makes no sense. One of these judges, Boasberg, actually argued to the court, "I have equal powers, and why don't my equal powers apply, State Department?" There's a shocking assessment, shocking statement. A lower court judge. Imagine a scenario where Donald Trump is negotiating the end of the war with Vladimir Putin and says, "We want to end the war. You got to pull your troops out of the Donbass." And then Putin says, "Okay, pull your special forces out of Ukraine." Trump then says, "Done." And then a lower court judge bangs the gavel and says, "Nope, Trump, you can't do that. Keep the troops in Ukraine." No president would ever take our president seriously ever again if these judges are allowed to do what they're doing. We are looking at an administrative, it is administrative, but it's also kinetic, and it's worse than it's ever been. I hope it does not get worse, but I don't see anything suggesting there will be a de-escalation. Nothing. So it's fascinating to me. One of the things I often hear from people is, there's no civil war, there's no civil strife. You're crazy. I walk outside and what do I see? People are shopping. Everything's normal. It's fascinating because of the arrogance of it. I was in Egypt during the Second Revolution. This was when Morsi was being pulled from power. 2 blocks from Tahrir Square, I was at McDonald's eating a cheeseburger and watching a football match. Nothing was going on. In my hotel, they had a casino. People were playing blackjack. Well, I don't understand. I thought a revolution was happening. How come I can walk outside, go to the mall, and buy a cell phone like nothing's happening? Because these people don't understand what war looks like. But I guess more to the point, and which is more hilarious, is I always ask people when they say this, do you think that in 1862, a man in Atlanta in the Confederacy walked out of his house, looked around, and everyone was fighting each other? Or do you think the battlefield was Antietam, was Gettysburg, was Harper's Ferry, and the fighting was far away from where these cities were? There are hot points of conflict across the country, but it is sporadic right now. So that's why I say it's not civil war, it's civil strife. And these periods sometimes abate. The only issue is I don't see any reason why that would be the case. The civil rights period, it wasn't overtly between political parties. It was activists with many in one political side, but there was still a remedy through the political system. Granted, it got pretty bad. Today, there is no remedy. You have on the left, the Democrat, I use left colloquially, the Democratic establishment using any and everything they can to damage, disrupt, and destroy anything associated with the right. Big tech censorship was the first play. You've got a tax on Tesla. They're trying to short Tesla stock and destroy the company. Activists are advocating for forcing a margin call on the debt on X to force Elon to liquidate his assets. Elon used his stock in Tesla as collateral for his loan to buy X. X recently sold, so this is no longer in play, but they were saying if we can drop the Tesla stock price by attacking the company to a certain degree, it will force a margin call on Elon's debt and force him to sell X and give it back or give it to somebody else. That's not going to work. They are attacking Tesla for the express purpose of destroying Elon Musk because of his political positions. They clearly don't care about climate. They cheer on terrorism. On The Daily Show, Jordan Klepper played clips of the Vegas attack and other attacks, notably the Vegas attack where a man took a rifle, fired wildly into the air, shooting at the building, trying to take cameras out and missing, unloaded into several cars, spray painted on the front of the building, and then firebombed several of the vehicles. They've caught him, by the way. When he played those clips, the Daily Show audience clapped and cheered.
Yeah, I remember.
Much to the shock of Jordan Klepper, who said, wow, you guys support.
Wow, yeah, quite.
Jimmy Kimmel made the joke about insinuating people should firebomb and vandalize Teslas. They clapped and cheered. Stephen Colbert did the same.
Yeah.
At the highest level of culture in the liberal faction, they are celebrating terrorism. They are celebrating the murder committed by allegedly by Luigi Mangione. Bill Burr went on this podcast and said that, and I'm not going to repeat it because, some of these platforms may take issue with what he said, but he called for the murder of billionaires. He then said free Luigi on more than one occasion, a man who is accused of murdering a CEO in cold blood. Now on the right, you have no calls.
Free Luigi, not because he thought he was innocent, but because he thought he was actually guilty.
They think he did it, and they think more should do it.
Yeah.
So what we have right now on the right, there are calls for violence. There's calls for de-escalation.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is exercising his constitutional authorities, and they are still, in every imaginable way, waging violence and obstruction at the administrative level. So should it be at this point that Donald Trump decides, I am not going to escalate any further, then you have tyranny. Then you will live in a dictatorship. You will live under the boot of what I would call a communist Chinese-style government. If Donald Trump uses commensurate force to respond, they are showing no sign of abatement. They will escalate in turn. That's what I fear is going to happen because people aren't going to tolerate the terrorism that we're seeing right now. That being said, we really don't know. We don't know. Donald Trump may run for a third term. It's unconstitutional. I think it's the 22nd Amendment. I could be wrong, but they could amend the Constitution. It'll be very difficult, but it's possible. After 2030, the census shift is going to be massive for a loss of power for the Democrats. We are currently trending towards Democrats losing power in this country in their current iteration, and they will be forced to moderate if they want to win. The net out-migration from blue states is massive, and they're looking to lose. I think California's going to lose 2. Texas will gain. Illinois is going to lose some. New York's going to lose some. And so blue states are losing congressional seats, which in turn means electoral college votes, and red states are gaining them. Ezra Klein made a great video where he pointed out, should that have been the case in 2024, even if Kamala won Michigan and Pennsylvania, she still would have lost to Trump because of this shift. So the important thing to understand right now with the deportations and why Trump is doing what he's doing, the Democrats brought in an estimated 10 to 20 million illegal immigrants. They claimed it was legal because they were asking for asylum. But these people aren't asylum seekers. From Venezuela? Well, stop in Mexico. Get asylum in Mexico. Nobody's going to get you there. And Mexico's beautiful. And they've got luxuries.
Yeah.
No, they came to America. What happens then in the American system, when the 2030 census occurs, they count illegal immigrants and citizens one for one. There's no difference. This means that when we apportion congressional seats, one for every 775,000, if California has 1.5 million illegal immigrants, they get 2 extra congressional seats, which in turn means 2 extra votes for the president. But those people are not citizens of this country, and they are not supposed to be represented in this way.
Yeah.
This is effectively a way to cheat and steal an election and steal the power from the American people. Donald Trump is mass deporting these people, and he's requiring citizenship to vote because he knows this is how they're cheating to feign power and steal political power at the highest level.
Yeah.
They will accuse Donald Trump of violating the Constitution every time he tries this. If Trump allows them to do it, Democrats will never lose another election. If Trump succeeds, Democrats will never win another election. This is a very tumultuous period. But you know what? As we're strapped for time, let me end with one final thought on this. You can add anything afterwards, but I'll just say this. Strauss-Howe generational theory. Are you familiar?
No.
They call it the fourth turning. Every 80 years, there is a period of conflict in the United States. So what happened 80 years ago?
The war.
World War II, World War I, this 20-year plus period. What happened 80 years before that?
Civil War.
And what happened 80 years before that?
Revolution.
Exactly. Would this be the one time in the past 200 years that Strauss-Howe generational theory is proven wrong, perhaps? Maybe not.
Yeah. I certainly see this not just as an American period of conflict. I think it's global because I see it as part of a populist movement that's happening worldwide. We are strapped for time. We've got to go on to your show. Yeah. I've got one last, which hopefully is a very quick answer. But when I first came across your work, I was very struck by you describing yourself as a sort of liberal, MAGA liberal. And I don't know, perhaps I'm misremembering, but I just remember that being interesting and knowing your history from Occupy towards Trump. Would you still call yourself a liberal in any sense?
I'd say post-liberal these days.
Post-liberal.
I'm a big fan of Carl Benjamin. He's a good friend. And, he's the famous classical liberal, as it were, but now he's a post-liberal, Lotus Eaters podcast. And this is basically, I can't do it justice in a short amount of time, but generally recognizing the limitations of liberalism and how they're susceptible to being destroyed. And that's what we're seeing now. So I would say post-liberal retains a lot of these liberal values, but also recognizes the importance of moral tradition and the requirements of strength to maintain your moral worldview. So in the truest sense of what it means to be liberal, I've always been what's called in the United States a social liberal. This is what Democrats used to be 20 years ago. But it's actually quite simple when you look at the Trump administration. Trump was a Democrat. RFK Jr. was a Democrat. Tulsi Gabbard was a Democrat. Elon Musk was a Democrat. Seems to be he's got a coalition that spans the political spectrum, at least it used to.
Mm-hmm.
The Democratic Party now, what do they represent? Honestly, I couldn't tell you. They simultaneously oppose war. Well, half of them oppose supporting Israel in their war. Those same people support funding Ukraine for their war. The other half are for both wars. Excuse me. They can't tell you what a woman is. They can't tell you what a man is. They change the spellings of these words periodically. They are for racial segregation. Honestly, it seems to change every other day what they actually represent. Right now, they're mad at Tesla. Why? Tesla is the world's leading electric car provider. Why are they attacking cars? Elon Musk owns only 12.8% of that company. So they're destroying these cars, these companies, the stock value of this company. And the best part, Tim Waltz mocked the Tesla stock as it was falling and said it cheers him up.
Yeah, I saw that on
Minnesota,
stage.
They may still, but last year held 1.6 million shares in Tesla in their pension account.
Yeah.
So when this goes down, that's the retirements of working class people, largely where those stocks are held. I could not tell you what Democrats support, except for, I suppose, tax the rich, sex changes for kids, open borders, no free speech, war in Eastern Europe. It's kind of remarkable. This party used to be free speech, anti-war.
It's anti-pluralist now as well.
Absolutely.
So yeah, okay. Well, Tim, thank you so much for speaking with me. Great pleasure, and congratulations on all your success here. It's amazing to see it in real life. My first time in your studios, and lots of exciting things happening in every little corner. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Winston Marshall Show with Tim Pool. If you want to support this show, remember all you have to do is press subscribe. If you do that, I get more phenomenal guests like Tim Pool exploring the issues you want to hear about and the mainstream media won't touch. And head over to winstonmarshall.co.uk for exclusive videos, content, and interviews, as well as ad-free viewing. So I recommend you head over there. Thank you, and until next time, be well.